Hi guys, welcome to another Two Pets Tech video. Today I'd like to talk to you about my Nikon DSLR kit. Now in previous videos I've mentioned my love of bridge cameras, and I still do, and I have several of them, more than I can mention. But I also actually have a proper DSLR kit, so I just wanted to show that to you today. So let's start with the lenses. Actually, no, let's start with the camera body itself. So the camera body that I have, it's pretty old now, but it's the Nikon D5300. So that's their low to mid-level APS-C DSLR. It doesn't have the highest specs, but it actually works pretty well. So it's relatively compact. The grip could be a bit bigger. I think that was improved in the subsequent versions of this camera, and I'll mention this in a little bit, but that's my latest lens. So going from the lowest focal length, and the first lens that I bought is this. It's a 35mm f1.8 prime. And what I like about it is that it's small. I mean, DSLRs are pretty big. So if you can get a small lens to put on it, it kind of reduces the footprint a little bit and makes it a little bit less intimidating. And I got recommended this because I was looking for an improvement in image quality when getting a DSLR, and I did hear that the 18 to 55 millimeter kit lens that comes with the Nikon D5300 was pretty bad, and so not wanting to have crappy images, since I'm paying for a proper camera, I got one of these, and it was quite good, except this equates to a 50mm equivalent focal length. So for a first lens it was good, but it was a little bit restrictive. You know, you kind of have a narrower field of view than what you're normally used to coming from a compact camera or even a cell phone camera. So let's just have a look at what that looks like on the camera body. So let me just pull this one out. So I'm always a little bit paranoid with getting dust onto sensors and things, so I always like to keep the DSLR body facing down so you're not sort of dropping dust into it. Okay, here we go. So it's still, I mean, the DSLR body itself is never going to be tiny, but at least it makes it look less intimidating. Still looks quite professional actually, but yeah, and it makes it a nice light body for walking around in. And the f1.8 means that it's better for lower light situations, and I really like it. Although being an amateur, I'm not really enjoying the limitations of a prime. So that brings us on to my next lens purchase. So this one comes in a fancy bag, and it's from Sigma. It's quite a big lens. And this is the Sigma 17 to 50mm f2.8. And just like the 35mm, this one is actually built specifically for APS-C cameras. So I wonder if you could see that, but that's got a big front element there, and it takes a filter thread of 77mm, which is quite big. It's quite solidly built, quite heavy as well, and there's a lot of glass in there. So let's see how that looks on the body. Now the reason why I bought this lens was I wanted the advantages of a kit type range of focal lengths of 17 or 18 to 55, but I also didn't want to compromise too much on quality and low light ability. So this was a good compromise because I could get my 17 to 50, which equates to about a 24 to 75 equivalent focal length, but I still have the wider aperture that I could use to take advantage of depth of field effects and being able to use this in low light situations. So let me just unlock it. So that telescopes out, not that much actually, it doesn't grow that much more than the base, about an inch more. So let me just take out, the lens hood adds a bit of length to it, but I like to keep the lens hood on. I was at the beginning putting UV filters at the front to protect the front element, but I think if you're going to buy a good lens with good quality optics, it doesn't make sense to then buy UV filters which are probably not going to be as well made optically and sort of put that in front of the lens and ruin the image quality that way. So this does make the body quite a bit bigger and heavier, but yeah, that's the compromise for getting that wider aperture. Yeah, and I actually use that quite a bit. I have shot a baptism or two with this, not professionally, just for my sister, and it works really well because in those situations you've got your, sketchy light conditions, and having a wider aperture is really helpful for mitigating some of that. All right. So up until recently, I didn't actually have an option for wider focal lengths. So this purchase came about because there was a sale relatively recently, I think a couple of years ago. Ooh, that's freaking me out that there's a piece of lint there. But anyway, but as a result, I did eventually get myself a Nikon kit lens. And this is the more high-end lens. This doesn't come usually with the D5300 or the middle tier APS-C bodies, but this comes as a kit with the higher end 7200 and D7500. And this is the 18 to 140 millimeter, which equates to a 24 to about 210. So it telescopes quite a bit. It doubles its length almost when you've got it zoomed out all the way to 140. So it's a big lens. Filter thread isn't as big. It takes, 67 mil filter threads. So a big piece. It's not as heavy as the 17 to 55. It's also not as fast as the 17 to 55. So like most kit lenses, it starts at 3.5, f3.5, and at 140 it goes down to f5.6, which isn't bad actually. And this focal length makes it a good walk around travel lens if you don't feel like carrying a whole bunch of other lenses, and if you're traveling a lot and you're moving from condition to condition, you don't really want to be changing lenses outside or anything like that. I certainly don't, because I don't want to introduce any dust into the sensor. But yeah, I really enjoyed this lens actually. I kind of wish that I had bought this to begin with, or if it was available with the D5300, because I really enjoy having this, I guess this is like a travel zoom is what they'd call it. And yeah, it's a really good range of focal lengths. It's not terribly fast, but it's also not expensive. So I think that is a good compromise. Yeah, and that's it is a little bit big, but I think it balances relatively well. I think with big lenses like this, I tend to hold it with two hands. I don't think you can hand hold it anyway. You can operate it one-handed, but then you can't operate the zoom. So I think with zoom lenses, you're gonna have to use two hands anyway. So that's really quite good. And for a long time, this was the longest focal length that I had on this camera. And it worked quite well. It was good for, trying to shoot birds. There's a show at the Taronga Zoo that I like to visit, the free in-flight bird show, where they actually have birds flying overhead, and I had a good time, and I had relatively good success with this lens. But of course, that sort of got me into bird photography and bird and flight photography. And unfortunately, unlike those trained birds, most birds that I encounter are actually wild, so they're not gonna, fly close to you or, be as accessible as those birds. So that's where this guy came in. So this is a relatively recent lens. This is the Nikon AFP 70-300, and what makes this really a good buy for me was, again, they had a sale, and so that knocked, about $50 off, and I think that just got it down to a price range that I was willing to pay. So what makes this lens extra special, because this isn't the first 70-300 lens that Nikon has made, but they changed the AF motor. So instead of an AF-S, which is their stepping motor, this is now an AFP, which uses a pulse motor or something. And not sure what the science of that is, but the crux is that it's quieter and it's faster focusing. It does require a firmware update for some cameras. My camera definitely needed it, but for newer cameras it just worked out of the box. And what I really liked about it was the reviews on it were quite good. It's nice and light, so even though it's quite long, it doesn't sort of make the camera too front heavy. The downside is there's a lot of plastic in there, including the lens mount. The lens mount is also plastic. Now I would be worried about that lens mount if this was the first plastic mount that I've ever used, but I've got a couple of Fuji kit lenses with plastic mounts, and I've had them for years, and I haven't had any issues, so I'm less apprehensive about plastic mounts. But yeah, that is one of the downsides. I wish it had a metal mount, just for durability and peace of mind. So this one takes a 58mm filter thread, and I got the VR version because I think if you're going to be operating at focal lengths up to 300, which is the equivalent of 450 in full frame, you're going to need all the VR help you can get. I certainly do. I don't have the steadiest hands, so any help in that regard is good. So let's see how it looks on the camera. Another downside that I found is, with the exception of the 35mm prime, the 18-140 and the 70-300 doesn't actually come with lens hoods, which is disappointing, so you have to pay for that separately. So let's just throw this guy in there. So I wish it did come with it. I haven't had a good reason to get one yet. I may, if there's like a sale or if I can get something like a third-party version. But So that's what it looks like. And there we go, against a white background. It does make it look long and does make it seem like it would be front heavy. It's a little bit front heavy, but because of its lightweight, it's actually easy to hand hold it with one hand if need be. I mean, again, I tend to cradle zooms with two hands because, you know, you need your one hand for zooming and the other hand for operating the camera. And the zoom action's quite smooth. It doesn't telescope out a lot. It does add about 50% again to the length of the lens in total. But yeah, I really enjoy this camera and lens combination. I'll post some pictures up now of some images I took at Western Springs in Auckland, and this camera and lens combination work really well. Like, I was far away enough from these semi-tame birds so that, you know, you don't spook them, but I can get close enough with this lens to get good images and good sharp images too. Yeah, and I think that I haven't had experience with the AFS version of this lens, but from what I can tell, the AFP motor works really well, snaps into focus really well, and the VR is quite good too. So highly recommend it if you need a longer focal length, but you know, you're shooting in bright daylight, you know, you're not really starving the camera of light or anything like that, because it does have fairly slow apertures. So it starts at 4.5 and ends at 6.3 at the long end. So not the fastest lens, but the upside of that is that you get quite a light body. You get quite a light camera lens to work with. Alright, so I think that's most of them, but I do have one other lens that I bought on a whim, and I probably didn't need to buy because I haven't really had much use for it. But this is the Nikon 85mm f1.8. So I bought this because I wanted a good portrait lens. This equates to, I think, 25mm equivalent. Fortunately, it comes with a lens hood. It comes with a very big front element. Actually, not too big, 67mm. The Sigma's still a bit bigger. But without the lens hood, it's actually relatively compact. And I must admit, I did a lot of checking on DxOMark to find out whether this would be a good lens on an APS-C body, because it is a full frame lens, and some full frame lenses don't do so well in APS-C bodies. But let's have a look at how that lens looks in this body. So let's just put that down. Alright. It's relatively bulbous, I guess. Not too bad. That very big front element. So what I found, I thought I'd be using this more for portraits, but I haven't shot many portraits recently. But what I did actually enjoy using this for was shooting longer distance landscapes and cityscapes. So here in Sydney, we've got this festival called the Vivid Festival, and it happens at night and happens every year, and there's lights projected on the Opera House and various other buildings in the Sydney CBD. And I actually took this lens and shot quite a few of those scenes from quite far away, actually. But because of the sharpness, because of the good performance, even at the widest apertures with this lens, I got some really good results, and I was able to keep the ISO quite low. So it's a good lens. I ended up not using it for the intended purpose, but I could still use it for portraits if I wanted to. Apart from doing bokeh tests, I haven't really used this for portraits, but I don't regret buying it. Some days. It does cost quite a bit. I think because I got this body on sale, I think the lens actually costs as much as the body, but you know, that is the case for most good lenses anyway. You pay more for the lens than the body. So of these lenses, I've got to say that most of the time I've actually got the 70-300 on here, and that's because that's more the focal lengths that I really enjoy shooting in, and for the subject matter that I shoot, which is birds and wildlife and stuff like that, I find that the 70-300 millimeter, or I guess it's math, 100 to 450 millimeter equivalent is more the focal lengths that I like to shoot in. So this has been a really good buy. I really enjoy this. Do let me know in the comments below if you've got any of these lenses and what you think about them. Also let me know if you want to know more about any of these lenses. I could always do some kind of review, I guess. I mean, none of these lenses are particularly new except for maybe the 70-300, so there's probably better and more comprehensive reviews out there on YouTube, but I'm always happy to help if you've got any questions. Anyway, I guess I shall see you later. Bye.